This video will be all about second language acquisition. According to Bryce and Roseberry, by the 2030s, ELLs will account for approximately 40% of the entire school-age population in the United States. In some areas of the United States, the population of ELs will be between 60% to 70% of the school-age children. There are different types of English instruction. One type is sheltered English instruction. Through this method, students receive content in their classes through English. However, physical activity, visuals, hands-on activities are included to help them understand and make the content more accessible to the student. There's also pull-out ESL classes. When you pull a student out, you are taking them out of their general ed classroom, and they are working with other EL students and the ESOL teacher to learn English. In a push-in ESL program, the ESOL teacher is coming in, working with the general ed teacher, co-planning, co-teaching, providing for students in their classroom and the gen ed content. There's also a term called sink or swim, which is not good. That's basically the view that we will put these kids in with the English-speaking students and not help them at all, and they should be okay, and if they're not, they're not. That term has come up before and has come up a lot in my reading, so I wanted to include that. There are two categories for English vocabulary. One is BICS. It's the basic communication skills. This is everyday language that a student will need to be able to communicate in English. There's also CALP, which is the cognitive academic language proficiency. This language is more related to the content. It's more of an academic language. This is the language that a student might pick up in biology class, geometry, earth science, language that is specific to that content. Some things that are normal for students who are learning a new language that you should be familiar with. One issue a student might have is interference or transfer. This is when rules that they know from their L1 transfer into their L2. So for example, in Spanish, you would say car blue. So they might transfer that into English, car blue, instead of a blue car. So that would be an example of an interference or a transfer. Students also may experience a silent period. This is when a new kid comes in and they're not comfortable with speaking yet. They're focused on listening to others use the new language and trying to comprehend what others are saying and how to use the new language. The silent period it's usually longer for younger students and younger children. It can be a few weeks, it could be a few months, it can last for up to a year. So that's another norm that you might expect to see in a new English language learner. Students will also do code switching, which is when they might not realize they're doing it, but they're speaking in one language and they'll throw in words from their native language. Younger students do this without realizing it. Some students do this because they don't know the word in English, so they just go back to the word that they know in their native language. There can also be language loss or subtractive bilingualism. This is when they're learning English and they're learning their L1, but their native language isn't being reinforced, and they start to favor English rather than their L1. And this isn't good, because they will start to lose the communication they might have with their family members, and they're going to start to lose their native language. You want them to have additive bilingualism, which means that they're maintaining their L1 while they're also learning their L2. And this would be that a student is reading still in Spanish and learning to read in English. They don't just completely stop reading in Spanish. They continue to read in both languages, or write in both languages, and communicate in both languages. While reading the book, What School Leaders Need to Know About English Learners, in chapter 5, there were a lot of things that are important that I wanted to highlight for learning a new language. The first thing that's important to help learn a new language is automaticity. Basically, the student is processing the words and the structures, and they're doing so quick enough that it's not taking as much time to translate things and to communicate in the new language, in English. This takes a lot of practice and a lot of time using the language. Another one that's important is meaningful learning. Basically, a teacher should know their learners, know what's important to them, and focus on what is important to those learners. And each year, you might have things that are important to different learners. And also make sure you're paying attention to each individual student's language level so that you can build on that language level. There's also intrinsic motivation. This really ensures that the student will be successful because they're intrinsically motivated. To help with intrinsic motivation, you need to make the classroom time of that pull-out group, make it inviting, and you can build this by giving them external motivators, but slowly taking them away. There's also things to consider, like the language ego and the student's self-confidence. Self-confidence is very important when they're learning a new language. Another thing that helps a student learn a new language is the ability to take risks, risk-taking. You can discuss with the students the importance of risk-taking in the class. Let them know that it's okay to take risks to learn and to become better English speakers. Only correct certain things so that they're not always being corrected and feel like they're always doing something wrong. But keep giving them the corrections until success is achieved. To do this, I would encourage small group work or partner work so that they can build up risk-taking with a small group before they go into the big group. Use their native language when possible. There are a lot of cognates in English and Spanish and in other languages as well that are very similar. And if students can recognize those cognates, they can learn the language a lot faster. There's also interlanguage, which is what language they speak in and what language they're thinking about. Here are the references that I used to make this PowerPoint or video. I read the book, What School Leaders Need to Know About English Learners. I also read an article about acquiring English as a second language and types of language instruction educational programs.